Victor's hands moved with practiced precision as he lifted the leather silkcase from the brass luggage cart, his fingers instinctively finding the worn handle grooves shaped by 14 years of the exact same motion. The weight told him everything before he even looked at the tag. 28 pounds, probably overpacked, guessed in 307. A woman traveling alone based on the floral scent lingering on the fabric. His shoulders absorbed the load automatically. Muscle memory older than most of the employees currently working the front desk of the Biltmore Hotel. The lobby stretched around him like a cathedral of old-world elegance. All vaulted ceilings and Moorish revival architecture that most guests photographed but never truly saw. Afternoon light sliced through the towering windows in sharp golden bands, illuminating dust particles that floated like tiny stars in the conditioned air. The marble floor beneath Victor's black work shoes held a mirror shined so perfect he could see the distorted reflection of his own face. 62 years old, skin the color of weathered mahogany, eyes that had learned long ago how to look without being noticed looking back. Nobody really saw him. That was the first truth of being a bellhop at a luxury hotel. You became part of the furniture, part of the gilt-edged scenery that wealthy tourists paid premium rates to experience. Your uniform charcoal gray with brass buttons that caught the light transformed you into a function rather than a person. Guests looked through you while handing over their bags, their voices pitched slightly louder than necessary as if you might not understand English, their tips dispensed with the mechanical gratitude of someone feeding coins into a vending machine. Victor had made peace with invisibility years ago, had learned, in fact, to weaponize it. His right hand reached automatically for the keycard hanging from the retractable badge reel on his belt, a gesture so habitual his conscious mind didn't even register it anymore. The card itself was an artifact, its magnetic stripe scratched and faded, the plastic yellowed along the edges like aged paper. Most of the staff had upgraded to the new proximity cards 3 years ago when the hotel renovated its security system, sleek white rectangles that you just waved near the reader. But Victor's card was grandfathered in, issued back when he first started in 2009, back before the ownership changed hands, before the digital overhaul, before everything got connected to the cloud and monitored by algorithms. His card still required the old readers, the ones with the physical slot. You had to slide it through with just the right speed and pressure. Too fast and it wouldn't register. Too slow and the system would time out. Victor had perfected the technique until he could do it blind. What nobody knew, what nobody had ever thought to question, was that his particular card, thanks to some glitch in the ancient programming, or perhaps a deliberate backdoor coded by a long-gone IT contractor, opened more than just the service areas it was officially authorized for. It opened doors that shouldn't open, doors that the hotel's modern security system had forgotten existed. He moved toward the service elevator now, the suitcase held at exactly the right angle to avoid banging against his leg, nodding politely at a couple in tennis whites who didn't acknowledge his existence. The woman was complaining about the restaurant reservation time, her voice sharp with the particular entitlement of someone accustomed to having problems solved by simply speaking them aloud. Her husband made agreeable noises, his attention on his phone. Victor pressed the elevator call button with the heel of his free hand. The doors opened with a muted chime, revealing the service elevator's utilitarian interior, scuffed metal walls, industrial rubber flooring, a fluorescent tube that flickered intermittently like a dying heartbeat. He stepped inside, positioned the luggage cart against the back wall, and reached for the control panel. His finger hovered over the button marked 3. Then, with a movement so slight that even a camera focused directly on him might not have registered it, he shifted and pressed 2 buttons simultaneously, 3 and B2, while sliding his ancient keycard through the reader slot in one fluid motion. The elevator doors closed, and for exactly 7 minutes, Victor ceased to exist in any recorded reality. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, like the world sees right through you, no matter how much you matter, then you understand something about what these characters are experiencing. Please subscribe to this channel and like this video, because by sharing these stories we remind each other that everyone has a story worth seeing. Now back to the moment when everything started to unravel. 3 floors above, in the cramped security office that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and electronic heat, Diane Harrington squinted at the monitor array and felt the familiar tension headache beginning its slow bloom behind her left eye. She'd been hired 6 weeks ago at the hotel's new Director of Loss Prevention, corporate speak for the person who figured out who was stealing what and made it stop. Her predecessor had been let go after a string of unexplained inventory discrepancies, missing bottles from the premium liquor stock, and one particularly embarrassing incident involving a guest's Rolex that vanished from a room safe. Diane was 47, divorced twice, childless by choice, and possessed the kind of methodical intelligence that made her simultaneously invaluable and universally disliked. She didn't do small talk. She didn't pretend to care about her co-workers' weekend plans. She showed up, did the math, found the patterns, and delivered reports that ended careers. Right now she was doing what she did best, watching. The security footage from the past 3 months played on the center monitor at increased speed, timestamps racing in the corner. Her job was to spot anomalies, the moments when the visual record didn't match the logs, when people appeared in places they shouldn't be, when the story told by the cameras conflicted with the story told by the data. She'd been at it for 4 hours straight, sustained by cold coffee and the grim satisfaction of puzzle solving when she saw it. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. 2 weeks ago. Service elevator A, ground floor. A bellhop older man, grey uniform, carrying luggage, entered the frame from the left. She could see his employee badge clearly enough. Victor Torres. She made a note on her legal pad, the pen scratching against paper with a sound that felt too loud in the quiet office. Victor appeared in the lobby cameras regularly, dozens of times per shift, always moving with the same unhurried efficiency. She watched him press the elevator call button. The doors opened. He stepped inside with the luggage cart. The doors closed. Diane's eyes flicked to the adjacent monitor, showing elevator A's interior camera. Victor appeared there, centered in frame, facing forward, standard positioning. She noted the time, 2 hours, 47 minutes and 33 seconds, p.m. Now, she switched her attention to the third monitor, which displayed a split screen of all the elevator arrival cameras on floors 2 through 9. She watched the timestamp advance. Elevator A was programmed to move at a consistent speed, approximately 8 seconds per floor. Victor had pressed the button for floor 3, 24 seconds. That's how long it should take for the elevator to arrive and the doors to open. 2 hours, 47 minutes and 33 seconds to 2 hours, 47 minutes and 57 seconds. She watched the third monitor. The third floor corridor camera showed the elevator doors. They remained closed at 2 hours, 47 minutes and 57 seconds. Remained closed at 2 hours, 48 minutes and 0 seconds. Still closed at 2 hours, 48 minutes and 30 seconds. Diane sat up straighter, her headache temporarily forgotten. She rewound the footage on the elevator interior camera, checked the timestamp again. 2 hours, 47 minutes and 33 seconds. Victor standing in the elevator, doors closing. Then, at exactly 2 hours, 47 minutes and 38 seconds. 5 seconds after the doors closed, the interior camera went black. Not static. Not the grainy interference of a signal disruption. Just ... black. As if the camera had been switched off or covered. The blackness lasted until 2 hours, 54 minutes and 41 seconds. 7 minutes and 3 seconds. When the image returned, the elevator was empty. The luggage cart was gone. Victor was gone. Diane pulled up the hallway cameras for the 3rd floor again, expanding the timeline. At 2 hours, 54 minutes and 52 seconds, Victor appeared in the 3rd floor corridor, but not from the elevator. He simply walked into frame from the right side of the screen, from the direction of the east stairwell, pushing the luggage cart as casually as if he'd been there all along. She rewound and watched again. Then again. Then she pulled up the stairwell cameras. Nothing. Victor never appeared in any stairwell footage. She checked the basement level cameras, thinking maybe he'd exited there. Nothing. She checked the 2nd floor cameras. 4th floor. 5th. Nothing. Nothing. For 7 minutes and 3 seconds, Victor Torres had been nowhere. And then he was somewhere, appearing in a hallway, like he'd materialized from thin air, continuing his job as if the laws of physical reality were optional suggestions. Diane felt something she hadn't felt in years of security work, the cold, electric thrill of discovering something genuinely inexplicable. Her hands, usually so steady when taking notes, trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She stopped herself. If she reported this to management now, they'd want an explanation. They'd want her to tell them exactly what happened, and she didn't know. Not yet. And Diane Harrington never presented half-finished work, never came to conclusions without having chased down every logical possibility first. She'd built her career on being certain. So instead of calling her supervisor, she did what investigators do when they find one impossible thing. She went looking for more of them. She expanded her search parameters, going back 6 months this time, filtering specifically for footage involving Victor Torres. The hotel's digital security system, for all its expensive sophistication, had one beautiful feature that Diane had immediately appreciated. It could track individual employees via their badge swipes and cross-reference with camera footage. Supposedly, it was for workflow optimization. In practice, it was a surveillance net so comprehensive it would make authoritarian governments jealous. She set the system to flag any instance where Victor's badge registered in one location, while the cameras showed him in another, or where there was a temporal gap of more than 30 seconds between his disappearance from one camera and his appearance in another. Then she hit search and waited. The results loaded slowly, the software churning through terabytes of footage. When the list populated, Diane stared at the screen with the growing realization that she hadn't stumbled onto a single anomaly. She'd stumbled onto a pattern. 47 instances in the past 6 months alone. 47 times when Victor Torres had vanished from the documented reality of the Biltmore Hotel's security system, only to reappear minutes later in locations that should have been impossible to reach in the time elapsed. She clicked on the earliest flagged incident, dated 8 months ago. The footage showed Victor entering the service elevator on the ground floor at 11:23 p.m., long after his shift should have ended. The interior camera went black at 11 hours, 23 minutes and 19 seconds. It remained black for 8 minutes and 41 seconds. When the image returned, the elevator was empty. No luggage cart this time. Just Victor, alone, entering an elevator late at night when he shouldn't have been in the hotel at all. Diane checked the hallway cameras. At 11 hours, 32 minutes and 15 seconds, Victor appeared on the 4th floor, walking calmly toward the east wing. He stopped at room 412, knocked gently, waited. The door opened. Diane couldn't see who opened it from the camera angle, and Victor stepped inside. He emerged 17 minutes later alone and walked back the way he came. This time, the cameras tracked him all the way to the employee exit on the ground floor, where his badge registered, clocking out at 11:54 p.m. She pulled up the guest registration for room 412 on that date. The room had been unoccupied according to the system, marked as under maintenance, but someone had been inside. Someone had opened that door. Diane's pulse quickened. This wasn't about missing liquor inventory or stolen watches. This was about something else entirely. Something that felt bigger and stranger and infinitely more interesting. She checked the guest logs for room 412 across the past year. The room was frequently listed as occupied, but with a curious detail. The guest name in the system was always the same: the Coral Group, a corporate booking. Except when Diane Cross referenced the Coral Group with the hotel's actual corporate accounts, she found nothing. No company by that name had a contract with the Biltmore, no credit card on file, no contact information. The room existed in a kind of bureaucratic limbo, always occupied, never vacant, but never generating any actual revenue or paperwork. Somebody had created a phantom booking, and that somebody had been using it for months, maybe longer. Diane leaned back in her chair, the springs creaking under her weight, and stared at the frozen image of Victor Torres standing in the empty fourth-floor corridor. His face in profile, caught in the hallway's recessed lighting, showed no particular emotion. No guilt, no nervousness, no furtive glancing around. He looked like a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. He looked like a man who had walked through walls before and would do it again. She glanced at the clock on her computer screen. 6:47 p.m. The day shift would be ending soon. Night shift rolling in. Victor usually worked days, according to his employee file. If she wanted to confront him, to ask him directly what the hell was going on, she'd need to do it soon. But confrontation wasn't Diane's style. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what game was being played and who all the players were. Instead, she pulled up the current camera feeds and located Victor in real time. He was in the lobby, standing near the concierge desk, chatting with one of the front desk clerks. From this distance and angle, he looked like exactly what he was supposed to be, an aging bellhop making small talk during a quiet moment, utterly unremarkable. Diane watched him for several minutes, studying his body language, the way he held himself. There was something about his stillness that felt deliberate, like a person conserving energy, waiting. As she watched, a woman approached him, late 30s, business attire, pulling a small roller suitcase. Victor greeted her with a polite nod, took her bag, led her toward the elevator. The interaction lasted maybe 20 seconds, completely ordinary, except Diane noticed something. When Victor pressed the elevator call button, his other hand, the one not holding the luggage handle, reached for the keycard on his belt. Not to use it yet, just to touch it. A habitual gesture, absent-minded, the way people touch their phone in their pocket to make sure it's still there. But there was something about the card itself that caught Diane's attention, even through the grainy security footage. It looked different from the standard employee cards. Older, more worn. The color was off-yellowed instead of white. She zoomed in as much as the system would allow, enhancing the image until it pixelated. The card was definitely non-standard, which meant it was from the old system, pre-2020, before the digital upgrade, which meant it had been programmed using different software, different protocols, which meant, potentially, it had capabilities that the new system didn't know about, couldn't track, couldn't control. Diane felt the pieces beginning to assemble in her mind. Not quite forming a complete picture yet, but suggesting a shape, an outline. Victor Torres had a skeleton key, not a literal key, but a digital one, a piece of obsolete technology that the hotel's modernized security system couldn't fully interface with, couldn't fully monitor. And he'd been using it for years, moving through the building via routes that shouldn't exist, accessing rooms that were supposedly empty, appearing and disappearing like a ghost who understood that ghosts only exist in the gaps where nobody's watching. The question was why. And the other question, the one that made Diane's investigator instincts hum with anticipation, was what else? If Victor could make himself invisible for 7-minute intervals, if he could access rooms that didn't exist in the official records, if he'd been doing this dozens of times over months or possibly years, what had he been transporting? What had he been facilitating? The obvious answer was crime, theft, smuggling, corporate espionage, infidelity, blackmail. The Biltmore catered to wealthy guests, powerful guests, guests with secrets worth hiding and money worth stealing. A bellhop with access to everywhere and accountability to nowhere could do a lot of damage, could make a lot of money. But something about Victor's demeanor in the footage bothered that easy conclusion. He didn't move like a criminal, didn't display the tells, the nervous glances, the rushed movements, the visible stress. He moved like someone doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing, with the clear conscience of a man who believed his actions were justified, which was, in Diane's experience, far more dangerous than simple corruption. Criminals knew they were breaking the law and acted accordingly, sloppy, paranoid, self-destructive. But true believers, people who thought they were serving some higher purpose, some personal code of ethics that superseded institutional rules, those people were meticulous, patient, nearly impossible to catch because they didn't think of themselves as needing to hide. Was Victor a true believer? And if so, what did he believe in? Diane saved her work, encrypted the files with her personal password, and shut down the monitors. She needed to think, needed to approach this carefully. One wrong move, and Victor would know he was being watched, would alter his behavior, would disappear into genuine invisibility. She grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair and headed for the door, then stopped. On impulse, she returned to her desk and pulled up the architectural records for the Biltmore Hotel. The building had been constructed in 1926, a sprawling Mediterranean revival masterpiece that had housed everyone from presidents to mobsters over its nearly century-long history. It had been renovated extensively in 2005, again in 2012, and most recently in 2020. The renovation reports included before and after blueprints. Diane opened both sets of files and compared them side by side on her dual monitors. The current blueprint showed a hotel with clean, logical geometry, hallways that ran in straight lines or right angles, elevator shafts positioned at symmetrical intervals, stairwells at the required safety intervals. Everything aligned with modern building codes and hospitality design standards. The old blueprint, the original 1926 design, plus the 2005 modifications, showed something else. The Biltmore had been built in an era when hotels were designed with a different philosophy. Servant staircases hidden behind walls so staff could move invisibly. Service corridors that ran like a parallel circulatory system behind the public spaces. Dumbwaiters and hidden passages, and architectural quirks that made sense in the context of a class-stratified society where the help needed to be available but never visible. When the hotel was renovated in 2020, many of those passages had been sealed off, repurposed, forgotten. Walls had been moved, floors had been reconfigured. The new layout literally paved over the old one. But sealed off didn't necessarily mean demolished. Diane traced her finger across the old blueprint, following a faint line that represented a service corridor running from the basement to the 4th floor. In the new blueprint, that corridor was gone, replaced by a solid wall, bisecting what had been an open passage. Except if you knew the corridor was there, if you had access to the sealed door at the basement level, you could theoretically still use it, assuming the door still functioned. Assuming you had a keycard that the old lock would still recognize. Assuming you were willing to move through a space that officially no longer existed. Diane zoomed in on the basement level of the old blueprint. There, marked with a small icon, was a utility access door positioned between the service elevator shaft and what was now the mechanical room. She switched to the new blueprint. That door wasn't marked at all. It had been designed out of existence. But Diane would bet her career that if she went down to that basement corridor right now, if she looked carefully at the wall where the old blueprint said a door should be, she'd find something. A seam in the paint, a slight irregularity in the drywall, evidence that something had been covered rather than removed. She checked the time, 7:23 p.m. Victor's shift had ended at 7 p.m. according to his schedule. He should be gone by now, which meant this was the perfect time to go exploring. Diane logged out of her computer, grabbed her phone and a small flashlight from her desk drawer, and headed for the elevator, her mind already racing ahead, already imagining what she'd find in the spaces between the walls, in the forgotten passages where the hotel's real history still lived. The basement of the Biltmore Hotel smelled like concrete and old water, a damp mineral scent that coated the back of Diane's throat as she descended the maintenance stairwell. The lighting down here was industrial, and sparse bare fluorescent tubes mounted on the exposed ceiling pipes, creating pools of harsh white light interrupted by stretches of heavy shadow. This was the part of the hotel that guests never saw, never thought about. The mechanical heart, where the HVAC systems hummed their constant drone, where the industrial washers and dryers processed mountains of linens, where the loading docks connected to the service elevators that carried supplies up to the kitchens and housekeeping storage. It was also, in Diane's experience, where the real business of any hotel happened. The arguments between staff, the smoke breaks where gossip was traded, the shortcuts and workarounds and unwritten rules that kept everything functioning despite the official procedures. She moved through the corridor with purpose, passing the mechanical room with its warning signs and locked access panel, passing the industrial laundry with its heat and noise spilling out through the doorway, passing a break room where two housekeepers sat on sagging couches, watching something on a phone, their laughter incongruously bright in the dingy space. Nobody paid attention to her. She was wearing her ID badge, walking like she belonged here. That was usually enough. She reached the section of corridor that corresponded to the location marked on the old blueprint, approximately 30 feet past the service elevator on the eastern wall. In the current layout, this was just a stretch of painted cinder block, a utility sink mounted at waist height, some exposed conduit running along the ceiling. Nothing special. Nothing to indicate that this wall was anything other than what it appeared to be. Diane stopped in front of it, pulled out her phone, and opened the photo she'd taken of the old blueprint. She compared the dimensions, counting ceiling tiles to orient herself precisely. According to the 1926 design, there should be a door here. A service access door, 40 inches wide, marked on the blueprint as leading to stairwell CA servant stair that ran from the basement to the 4th floor, bypassing the main elevators. She ran her hand along the wall, fingers exploring the painted surface. The cinder block was rough under her touch, the paint industrial grade and thick. At first she felt nothing unusual, just a wall. Then, about 3 feet to the left of where she'd initially searched, her fingertips found it. A seam. barely perceptible but there, a vertical line in the paint, ruler straight, running from floor to ceiling. Diane's pulse quickened. She traced the seam upward, then searched for the other edge, found it 42 inches away, exactly the width the old blueprint had specified. She stepped back and examined the wall section more carefully. Now that she knew what she was looking for, she could see it, the faint outline of a door frame, covered with layers of paint and drywall compound, but still there, still real. Someone had sealed this door, rather than removing it entirely, which meant on the other side, the passage probably still existed. She searched along the seam for any sign of a handle, a lock, an access point. Found nothing. The door had been sealed completely, rendered inaccessible. Or so it would seem to anyone who didn't have a keycard that could activate locks the modern system didn't acknowledge. Diane stood there, in the fluorescent-lit basement corridor, staring at the wall that wasn't quite a wall, and felt the pieces clicking into place with the satisfying precision of a well-solved puzzle. Victor Torres hadn't been moving through the hotel using some kind of magic or technological glitch. He'd been using the old architecture, the hidden passages that the 2020 renovation had covered over, but not destroyed. His ancient keycard, with its outdated programming and grandfather clause access, could still activate the electronic locks on those sealed doors locks that the new security system didn't know existed, couldn't monitor, couldn't track. For 7 minutes, Victor could slip into those passages, moving through the walls like a ghost, traveling between floors without using any of the monitored routes, appearing wherever he needed to appear without leaving any digital footprint. It was brilliant in a way, ingenious, the perfect exploitation of the gap between old and new systems, between documented reality and physical reality. But it still didn't answer the question that mattered most. Why? What was Victor doing in those 7-minute intervals? What was he transporting? Who was he meeting in room 412? Diane pulled out her phone and checked the time, 7:51 p.m. If Victor followed his usual pattern and patterns were what people like him always followed, he'd be back in the hotel within the hour. The footage showed him returning in the evenings several times a week, long after his official shift ended, using his badge to enter through the employee entrance, and then vanishing. Tonight, Diane decided, she wouldn't watch him on cameras. Tonight, she'd follow him. Victor Torres sat in his 2004 Honda Accord in the employee parking lot and watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the Miami sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The car's interior was clean but worn, the driver's seat molded to the exact shape of his body after years of use, the steering wheel grip rubbed smooth where his hands always rested. He'd bought this car new, back when new things still seemed possible, back when he still believed that hard work and quiet dignity would eventually be rewarded. 18 years later, the Accord still ran perfectly, the engine turning over with reliable precision every single time, because Victor maintained it the way he maintained everything in his life, with careful attention and respect for longevity. The parking lot was half empty, most of the day's shift already gone home. Through the windshield, Victor could see the back side of the Biltmore, the part without the elegant facade, where the loading docks and industrial air conditioning units clustered like mechanical parasites attached to the beautiful host building. He'd worked here 14 years, longer than many marriages lasted, longer than most people stayed at any job in the modern economy, where loyalty was a concept from another era, quaint and obsolete. 14 years of carrying luggage, of nodding politely, of being invisible. 14 years of listening to people's conversations without being acknowledged as a listener. of entering rooms where intimate moments had just concluded, of transporting the possessions of strangers and being trusted because he was too unimportant to matter. Most of his co-workers had turned over multiple times during his tenure. The young ones came and went, using the bellhop position as a temporary gig while they figured out their real plans. The older ones retired, or got fired, or moved on to other hotels, other cities. Victor stayed, not because he loved the work, though he didn't hate it either, but because this hotel was his, in a way that had nothing to do with ownership or employment. His grandmother had worked here in 1952, when the hotel was still recovering from its wartime decline, when it was being restored to its former grandeur. She'd been a chambermaid, one of dozens of invisible women who cleaned rooms and changed sheets and polished brass, while wealthy tourists lounged by the pool and ate elaborate meals and never once considered who made it all possible. She'd been 19 years old, newly arrived in Miami from Cuba, barely speaking English, desperate for any work that would keep her fed and housed. The hotel's owner at the time, Robert Ashford III, sign of old New England money, who'd bought the Biltmore as a vanity project, had noticed her, and she'd made the choice that young, desperate, invisible women sometimes made when powerful men noticed them. Victor's mother had been born 9 months later, unclaimed, unofficial, a secret that Robert Ashford paid to keep quiet through monthly checks delivered by discreet lawyers. His grandmother had named his mother Elena, and had raised her in a small apartment in Little Havana, while continuing to work at the Biltmore, cleaning the rooms where her daughter's father slept when he visited Miami, washing the sheets where he brought other women, being invisible to the man who had made her son. Elena, Victor's mother, had died when Victor was 12, cancer, that they'd caught too late because they couldn't afford regular doctors. His grandmother had raised him the rest of the way, working double shifts at the hotel, even as she aged, even as her hands developed arthritis and her knees protested the stairs. She'd told him the truth about his family when he turned 18, sitting him down in their tiny kitchen and explaining with quiet dignity that his grandfather was Robert Ashford III, that his mother's brother, his uncle, was Senator Robert Ashford IV, currently serving his second term representing Florida in Washington, D.C. She'd told him this not because she expected anything from it, not because she wanted money or recognition, but because she believed he deserved to know where he came from. Victor had listened and felt something harden inside him, not anger, exactly, but a cold certainty about the world's fundamental unfairness. When he'd applied for the bellhop position at the Biltmore 10 years later, using his mother's maiden name, Taurus, instead of his grandmother's real surname, he'd done it with clear intent. He would work in the hotel that had belonged to his family by blood, if not by law. He would occupy the same spaces his grandmother had occupied. He would be invisible in the same way she'd been invisible. But, unlike her, he would use that invisibility for something. The keycard on his belt was a relic from his first week of employment, issued before the hotel fully digitized its security system. He'd discovered its unusual properties by accident, trying to access a storage closet on the 3rd floor, and instead finding that his card opened a door that shouldn't have opened, revealing a narrow stairwell that wasn't on any of the current maps. He'd explored carefully, methodically, over months and then years, mapping the hidden geography of the Biltmore's old architecture, the passages that renovations had sealed over but not destroyed, the servant stairs that still existed behind the walls, the routes that allowed him to move invisibly, just like his grandmother had moved invisibly, but with purpose. For the first few years, he'd used the passages only for himself, shortcuts during busy shifts, quiet places to rest unseen, a private geography that was his and his alone. Then, 5 years ago, his grandmother had gotten sick. Dementia, the doctor said, her memories fragmenting, her present and past blurring together. She'd started asking to go home, but home for her wasn't their apartment in Little Havana. Home was the Biltmore, the place where she'd spent her youth, where she'd met Victor's grandfather, where her whole story had begun. Victor had tried to bring her to visit officially, through the front entrance as a guest, but she'd gotten confused, agitated by the crowds and the noise, disoriented by how much had changed. The visit had ended with her crying, insisting this wasn't the right place, that home was somewhere else. That night, Victor had made a decision. He'd brought her back to the hotel after midnight, using his employee entrance, and led her through the hidden passages to the 4th floor, to a room that was rarely used, that he'd learned to access through the old service corridor. Room 412. He'd furnished it slowly over months, a comfortable chair, some lamps, photographs from the 1950s that he'd found in antique shops, a radio that played the kind of music she remembered. Nothing valuable, nothing that would be missed, just enough to create a space that felt like the hotel. She remembered the hotel that existed in her fractured memory. Once or twice a week he'll bring her to visit, using the hidden passages, sitting with her in room 412 while she talked about her youth, about the hotel, about things that had happened, and things that maybe never happened, but were real to her. She never confused those visits. In room 412, she was always calm, always present, always herself. The hotel's security system listed room 412 as occupied by the Coral Group of fake booking Victor had created using a disused corporate account code he'd found in the old database. As long as the room showed as occupied, housekeeping wouldn't enter. As long as nobody checked too carefully, nobody would notice. For 5 years, it had worked, until today. Victor had seen the new security director watching him in the lobby earlier, had felt the weight of her attention in a way that was different from normal oversight. She'd been looking at him, not through him, which meant she'd found something, which meant his time was running out. He started the Accord's engine, listening to its familiar rumble, and pulled out of the parking lot. Not to go home, not yet. He needed to move the contents of room 412 before anyone went looking. Needed to erase the evidence of what he'd been doing, even if it meant losing the space his grandmother needed. Better to lose the room than to lose everything. The sky was fully dark by the time he parked in a different lot, 6 blocks from the hotel. He walked back slowly, keeping to side streets, just an old man out for an evening stroll. Nobody who saw him would remember him 5 minutes later. He entered the Biltmore through the employee entrance, badging in at 8:43 p.m. The night shift barely glanced at him. Victor working odd hours wasn't unusual. The loading dock supervisor nodded in his direction, made a note on his clipboard, went back to his phone. Victor moved through the basement corridor, past the mechanical room, past the laundry, to the sealed door that only he knew existed. He pulled out his keycard, the yellowed plastic warm from being pressed against his body all day, and slid it through the hidden reader slot, so thin and so covered by layers of paint that you had to know exactly where to find it. The mechanism clicked, a sound so quiet it was almost subliminal. The door opened inward on hinges that Victor kept oiled, revealing darkness and the smell of enclosed air, stale but not rotten. He stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind him, and clicked on the small flashlight he always carried. The beam illuminated a narrow stairwell, concrete steps rising steeply, walls bare cinder block, no decoration or concession to aesthetics. This had been built for servants, for people whose comfort didn't matter, whose existence was purely functional. Victor climbed slowly, his knees protesting the steep angle, his breathing heavy in the enclosed space. The stairs rose through the dark heart of the hotel, parallel to the guest floors, but separate, invisible, forgotten. At the fourth-floor landing, he found the second door, activated it with his card, and stepped out into a service corridor that technically shouldn't exist anymore. A 10-foot stretch between sealed doors that connected to an old utility junction. From there, another door opened into the back of a housekeeping closet that was rarely used. From the closet, a service door led to the fourth-floor guest corridor, and from there, it was a simple walk to room 412. The whole journey took exactly 7 minutes. Victor stood outside room 412 and listened for a moment, confirming the hallway was empty. Then he slid his keycard through the lock, heard the familiar click, and pushed open the door. The room smelled like lavender from the sachets his grandmother liked. The lamps cast warm amber light. The chair where she usually sat faced the window, though the curtains were drawn. Everything exactly as he'd left it 3 days ago, after her last visit. He stepped inside, began mentally cataloguing what he'd need to remove, what he could leave, and heard the voice behind him, calm and measured and utterly unsurprised. "Hello, Victor. I think we need to talk." He turned slowly, his heart suddenly loud in his chest, and saw the security director standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, her expression unreadable. Diane Harrington, that was her name. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her, the lock clicking into place with a sound like the closing of a trap. Victor's first instinct was to run, to push past this woman and disappear back into the walls, back into the invisible spaces where people like Diane Harrington couldn't follow. His muscles tensed, his weight shifting almost imperceptibly toward the door, but he stopped himself. Running would confirm guilt. Running would prove he had something to hide. And, more fundamentally, at 62 years old, after 14 years of being invisible, after a lifetime of watching powerful people take what they wanted, while people like him cleaned up the mess, Victor was tired of running. So instead, he stood still in the amber lamplight of room 412, his hands loose at his sides, his expression carefully neutral, and waited for Diane to make the first move. She didn't rush, didn't start with accusations or threats. Instead, she looked around the room with the systematic attention of someone cataloging evidence. Her eyes moved from the vintage photographs on the dresser to the comfortable chair by the window, to the small stack of books on the nightstand, to the radio playing softly in the corner, big band music from the 1940s, scratchy and warm. "This isn't what I expected," she said finally, her voice quiet enough that it didn't feel like an interrogation, more like an observation. "When I found the discrepancies in the security footage, when I tracked your movements through the building, I assumed I'd find something ... criminal, stolen property, drugs, blackmail material, something that made sense." She turned to look at him directly, and Victor saw something in her face that surprised him. Not anger or triumph, but genuine curiosity. "But this is just a room, a comfortable room, furnished like someone lives here, like someone comes here to feel safe." Victor said nothing. Years of being invisible had taught him the power of silence, of waiting for the other person to reveal what they actually wanted. Diane walked to the dresser, picked up one of the photographs, a black and white image of the Biltmore's pool in the 1950s. Women in modest bathing suits, men in swim trunks, everyone impossibly young and hopeful. She studied it for a long moment. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, she said, still looking at the photograph. "Corporate security, loss prevention, internal investigation. I've caught embezzlers and thieves and con artists. I've sent people to prison. I'm good at finding patterns, of seeing what doesn't fit." She set the photograph down carefully, exactly where she'd found it. "You don't fit any of the patterns, Victor. You've worked here 14 years with a spotless record. Never late, never sick, never complained. Your background check was clean. Your finances are normal. You pay your bills. You save a little. You don't live beyond your means. You're not stealing from the hotel. You're not selling access to wealthy guests. You're not running drugs or facilitating infidelity for profit. She turned to face him fully now, crossing her arms, her posture more thoughtful than aggressive. So what are you doing? Why maintain a secret room that doesn't exist in any official record? Why use hidden passages that nobody else knows about? Why take such extraordinary risks for ... She gestured around the room, at the humble furnishings, the personal touches that spoke of care rather than profit. ... This? Victor felt the weight of the question pressing down on him like physical force. He could lie, could make up a story that would satisfy her without revealing the truth, could say it was his own private space, a place to rest between shifts. Nothing more complicated than that. But looking at Diane Harrington's face, intelligent, patient, genuinely interested, he realized that she'd already seen through every lie he might tell. She'd tracked him through the building's hidden geography, had found patterns nobody else had noticed, had followed him here despite the impossibility of it. She'd earned the truth in her way. My grandmother worked here, Victor said quietly, his voice rusty from disuse. He wasn't accustomed to talking about real things, about things that mattered. Started in 1952, when she was 19. She was a chambermaid, invisible, like all the staff back then. You cleaned rooms and changed sheets, and the guests looked right through you, like you were furniture. He moved to the chair by the window, sat down heavily, felt the familiar comfort of the cushions that he'd selected specifically for his grandmother's arthritic back. She met someone, one of the owners, got pregnant. He gave her money to keep quiet and went back to his real life, his real family. She raised my mother alone, kept working here, kept being invisible. Diane lowered herself to sit on the edge of the bed, still listening, still not interrupting. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. My grandmother raised me, told me the whole story when I turned 18. Who my grandfather was, why we didn't have his name, or his money, or any claim to the legacy he built. Victor's hands rested on the arms of the chair, his fingers tracing the worn fabric. 5 years ago, my grandmother got sick, dementia, started losing herself, but she kept asking to come home, and home for her was this hotel, the place where she spent her youth, where everything important in her life happened. So I brought her here. He looked up at Diane, his eyes steady. This room is for her, so she can visit the only home she remembers, so she can sit here and listen to the music she loves, and look at the pictures, and feel like she's back when everything still made sense. That's what I'm doing with your secret passages and your impossible security gaps. I'm giving an 89-year-old woman with dementia a few hours of peace before she forgets even this. The room fell silent except for the soft music from the radio. Diane sat very still, processing what she'd just heard, her investigator's mind clearly working through the implications, checking the story against the evidence, looking for inconsistencies. Victor waited. He'd told her the truth, most of it anyway. Not all of it, but enough. Your grandmother's name? Diane asked finally. Carmen Torres. Diane pulled out her phone, typed briefly, waited. Victor knew what she was doing, searching employment records, verifying his story. After a moment her expression shifted, confirming she'd found what she was looking for. Carmen Torres, chambermaid, employed 1952 to 1987. Diane read from her screen. Retired at age 54. She looked up. The records show her address as Little Havana. Still there, still there. I live with her. Take care of her. Diane set her phone down, her expression softer now but still analytical, still working through the puzzle. This is compassionate, she said slowly, and creative, and completely against hotel policy. You've been using unauthorized access to maintain an unofficial room using a fake booking account, circumventing security protocols, and exposing the hotel to liability if anything went wrong. Victor nodded. I know. You could be fired. Prosecuted for unauthorized access. The hotel could claim you were stealing services. I know, Victor repeated, his voice calm. He'd understood the risks from the beginning, had accepted them as the cost of doing what needed to be done. Diane stood, walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside slightly to look out at the Miami night. The city lights sparkled in the distance, the ocean a dark absence beyond them. I should report this, she said to the window. That's my job. That's what I was hired to do. Find irregularities, document them, recommend corrective action. She let the curtain fall back into place and turned to face Victor again. But the thing is, this isn't the only irregularity I found. Your grandmother's visits are one thing, but room 412 has had other visitors, other people you've brought here using those same hidden passages. And unlike your grandmother's story, which makes sense and feels true, those other visits don't add up. Victor felt his stomach drop. He'd been so careful, so methodical, but of course she'd found the other visits. Of course, Diane Harrington, who'd spent 23 years finding patterns, who'd tracked him through 7-minute gaps in security footage, would have seen everything. There's a pattern, Diane continued, pulling out her phone again and swiping through what Victor assumed were logs or screenshots. Every third Tuesday, for the past 8 months, 2 people have been accessing this room. Neither of them registered guests, both arriving separately, staying for approximately 90 minutes, leaving separately. And you, she looked at Victor directly, you facilitate it. You'll bring them here through your secret passages. You make sure they're not seen on any cameras, and then you escort them out the same way. She showed him the screen. Victor saw timestamps, thumbnail images pulled from various cameras, showing figures that were frustratingly indistinct, but enough to establish a pattern. So, I'll ask again, Victor, what exactly are you doing? Because bringing your grandmother to visit is one thing, but facilitating clandestine meetings between unidentified individuals in a hotel room that doesn't officially exist, that's something else entirely. Victor's mind raced. He could refuse to answer, could tell her to do whatever she felt she had to do, could maintain his silence and accept the consequences. But Diane Harrington didn't strike him as someone who would just let this go. She'd keep digging, keep investigating, and if she kept investigating, she'd find things that would hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. Have you told anyone else? Victor asked carefully. About what you found? Diane shook her head slowly. Not yet. I wanted to understand it first. I don't present incomplete work. That was something, at least. Victor stood, walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer. Inside was a manila folder worn at the edges. He hesitated for just a moment. Crossing this line meant involving Diane in something much bigger than his grandmother's visits, then pulled it out and handed it to her. Open it, he said quietly. Diane took the folder, sat back down on the bed, and opened it carefully. Victor watched her face as she examined the contents. Watched her eyes widen slightly. Watched her posture shift from curious to alert. Inside the folder were photographs. Not old vintage pictures like the ones on the dresser, but recent ones. High-quality digital prints showing 2 people, a man in his early 50s, handsome in the generic way of politicians, with silver-touched hair and a practiced smile, and a woman in her 40s, professional attire, striking features, the kind of face that belongs to someone accustomed to courtrooms and boardrooms. In some photos, they were sitting at a table in what was clearly room 412, papers spread between them. In others, they were closer, the body language unmistakably intimate. In one, they were kissing, the man's hand cradling the woman's face with a tenderness that cameras couldn't fake. "Senator Robert Ashford," Diane said, identifying the man immediately. Her voice had gone flat, professional, the voice of someone who'd just stumbled into something significantly more complicated than a hotel security issue. "He's married, 2 kids, runs on family values and Christian faith. Up for re-election next year." She looked up at Victor, and he saw the wheels turning in her head, connecting dots, seeing implications. "And you're facilitating this? You're helping a senator conduct an affair in a secret hotel room?" She stopped herself, clearly recalibrating, thinking through the angles. "That's leverage. That's blackmail material. That's political dynamite. Why would you?" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing as another connection formed. "Ashford. Robert Ashford. That name was in your grandmother's employment file, listed as her emergency contact back in the 1960s. She stared at Victor with new understanding, the pieces snapping together. "Robert Ashford. Your grandmother worked for the Ashford family, and you said your grandfather was one of the owners. Quotes Robert Ashford III, Victor confirmed quietly. "The senator is Robert Ashford IV, my uncle, my mother's half-brother." The room went silent again, the revelation hanging between them like smoke. Diane looked back down at the photographs, reassessing everything through this new lens. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, choosing each word deliberately. "So you're not blackmailing him. You're helping him. Why? He doesn't know who you are, does he? Doesn't know your family?" "He has no idea," Victor said. "And I don't want his acknowledgement. I don't want his money or his name. What I want is for him to have one place where he can be honest. One place where the cameras aren't watching and the press isn't listening, and he can be whoever he actually is instead of who everyone expects him to be." Victor moved to the window, looked out at the same view Diane had just examined. "The woman in the photos is Rebecca Chun. She's a civil rights attorney. Smart, principled, divorced. She and the senator met 3 years ago during a committee hearing. They fell in love. Real love. Not the polished marriage for politics he has with his wife." He turned back to face Diane. "I don't know how they found out about this room. Maybe the senator heard rumors about hidden spaces in old hotels. Maybe Rebecca did research on the architecture. But 8 months ago, they approached me, asked if there was a way they could meet privately. Said they needed somewhere safe. And you said yes," Diane finished. "Because his family, even if he doesn't know it." Victor shook his head. "I said yes because I looked at his face and saw someone desperate. Saw someone trapped between duty and desire, between public image and private truth. I know what that looks like. My grandmother lived it. Loved someone she couldn't claim. Raised a child she couldn't explain. Worked in a building owned by a man who pretended she didn't exist." He gestured at the room around them. "This place, these hidden passages, this secret geographer, it's always been for people who needed to be invisible. My grandmother, the servants who raised other people's children and cleaned other people's messes. And now my uncle, who can't admit he loves someone because it would destroy his career. Maybe that makes me complicit in a lie, but I've lived my whole life in the spaces between official stories and actual truth. So yes, I help them. I give them 90 minutes every 3 weeks, where they can pretend the world is different than it is." Diane closed the folder carefully and set it on the bed beside her. Her face was unreadable, her investigator's mask back in place. "You realize what you've given me," she said quietly. "I could end his career with these photos, could sell them to the press for enough money to retire, could use them to leverage anything I wanted from him." Victor nodded. "I know. So why show me? Why trust me?" "Because you asked," Victor said simply. "Because you could have reported me already and didn't. Because you said you wanted to understand before making decisions." That tells me you're not just following rules. You're trying to figure out what's right. He sat back down in his grandmother's chair, suddenly feeling every year of his age, every hour of his long shifts, every ounce of the weight he'd been carrying. I'm tired, Miss Harrington. Tired of secrets and invisible roots and pretending I'm no one. If you're going to turn me in, if you're going to expose the senator, if you're going to shut down this room and take away the only place my grandmother can still recognize as home, then do it. I won't stop you. I'm just ... tired. Diane stood, walked to the dresser, looked at the vintage photographs again, picked up one showing a young woman in a maid's uniform, standing in front of the Biltmore's main entrance, squinting into the sun, smiling shyly. On the back, written in faded ink, Carmen, first day, 1952. Your grandmother, Diane said, not quite a question. 19 years old, brave enough to start over in a new country, naive enough to trust the wrong person. Diane set the photo down gently, handling it like the sacred artifact it was. I need to think, she said finally. I need to process this. I need to figure out what happens next. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. The senator and Miss Chun. When's their next visit? Next Tuesday, 10 p.m. I'll be here, Diane said. I need to see this for myself. Need to understand what I'm protecting or exposing. She opened the door, checked the hallway, then looked back at Victor one more time. Don't remove anything from this room. Don't warn them. If I'm going to make a decision, I need all the information. Can you do that? Victor nodded slowly, understanding that he'd just placed his future, his grandmother's peace, and his uncle's career into the hands of a woman whose job was to find problems and eliminate them. But he'd told the truth. He was tired. And maybe, just maybe, Diane Harrington would turn out to be someone who understood that truth was more complicated than security footage and policy violations. I'll be here Tuesday, Victor said quietly. Diane nodded once, sharp and decisive, then left, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft click that sounded, to Victor's ears, like the cocking of a gun. The days that followed moved with the surreal quality of a dream, where everything appears normal on the surface, while some fundamental wrongness lurks just beneath. Victor went through his shifts at the Biltmore with mechanical precision, greeting guests, carrying luggage, smiling politely, being invisible, while hyper-aware that Diane Harrington was somewhere in the building, watching, evaluating, deciding. He saw her occasionally, in the lobby, walking with purpose toward the security office, in the employee cafeteria, eating lunch alone while scrolling through her phone. Once, passing in a corridor, their eyes met for just a second before they both looked away. Two people carrying the same heavy secret, waiting to see which of them would crack first. Victor didn't sleep well. Lay awake in his small room in the little Havana apartment, listening to his grandmother's breathing in the next room, wondering what would happen when Diane saw the senator and Rebecca together, wondering if he'd made a catastrophic mistake by showing her the photographs, by trusting a stranger whose literal job was to expose secrets. On Monday night, he brought his grandmother to room 412 for what might be the last time. She'd been having a good day, lucid, present, recognizing him without prompting. He'd helped her into the car, driven carefully through Miami's evening traffic, brought her through the hidden passages with patient slowness as she navigated the stairs, one careful step at a time. In room 412, she'd settled into a chair with a sigh of contentment that broke Victor's heart. I remember this room, she said in Spanish, her voice soft with nostalgia. I cleaned it so many times. The family that stayed here had a little girl. She used to leave me drawings, hide them under the pillow for me to find. Victor didn't correct her, didn't mention that Rome 412 had probably housed thousands of guests over the decades, that her memory was conflating dozens of rooms and dozens of families into one composite image. In her mind, it was real. In this room, she was home. "Do you remember working here, Abuela?" Victor asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed, giving her his full attention. "Of course I remember," she said, a flash of her old sharpness returning. "I worked harder than anyone, cleaned 20 rooms a day sometimes. My hands would crack and bleed from the chemicals, but I never complained." "You don't complain when you're lucky enough to have work." She looked around the room, her eyes distant. "I met someone here, someone important. He was beautiful, like a movie star. He said I was beautiful too, said he'd take care of me." Her expression darkened. Men say many things when they want something. Victor reached over and took her hand, the skin paper thin over prominent bones, the fingers that had cleaned thousands of rooms now weak and trembling. "You took care of yourself, Abuela. You took care of Mama. You took care of me. You didn't need him." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment her eyes were completely clear, completely present. "I named her Elena," she said, "after my mother. He wanted me to give her away, to let some American family adopt her so she could have a better life. But she was mine. She was all I had of value in this world." Tears tracked down her weathered cheeks, and Victor felt his own eyes burning. "You did the right thing," he said, his voice thick. "Mama had a good life because of you. I have a good life because of you." She smiled then, sad and sweet and infinitely weary. "I just wanted to matter," she whispered. "I wanted to be someone people saw." "I see you, Abuela," Victor said. "I've always seen you." They sat together in the lamplight, listening to the old music, while his grandmother drifted between past and present, between memory and dream. Victor stayed until she fell asleep in the chair, her breathing deep and steady, her face relaxed in a way it never was in their apartment, where the sounds of the city pressed through thin walls. He covered her with a blanket, kissed her forehead, and sat watching her sleep until nearly midnight, memorizing this moment, this peace, in case it was the last time. When he finally helped her back through the hidden passages and drove home through the empty streets, Victor felt like he was saying goodbye to more than just a room. He was saying goodbye to the illusion that invisible people could carve out safe spaces, that secrets could stay buried, that love and loyalty could exist outside the official record. Tuesday would bring judgment. Tuesday would reveal whether Diane Harrington was someone who enforced rules, or someone who understood that sometimes rules needed breaking. Victor parked in front of their apartment, helped his grandmother up the stairs, tucked her into bed. She was already forgetting the evening, the room, the peace she'd found there. By morning she'd ask where they'd been, why she was tired, and he'd make up some gentle lie about a long walk or an early dinner. He sat in his own room, the window open to let in the humid night air, and waited for Tuesday. Diane Harrington spent Monday evening in her office with the door locked, reviewing everything she'd compiled on Victor Torres, Senator Robert Ashford, and Rebecca Chun. She'd done background checks on all three, pulling information that went far deeper than any surface investigation would reveal. Victor's story checked out completely. Carmen Torres's employment history at the Biltmore was documented. The timeline matched. Birth records confirmed that Elena Torres had been born in 1953. Mother listed as Carmen Torres, father listed as unknown, a polite fiction that everyone understood meant either the father was unmarried to the mother or the father was married to someone else. Senator Robert Ashford's genealogy was a matter of public record. Robert Ashford III had married in 1947, had one legitimate son, Robert Ashford IV, the current senator, in 1971. The timeline meant that Carmen Torres's pregnancy would have occurred when Ashford III was still married, still respectable, still maintaining the image of old money propriety. Diane had done the math. If Carmen's daughter Elena was born in 1953, and if Victor was telling the truth about his grandfather's identity, then Senator Robert Ashford IV and Elena Torres had been half-siblings, which made Victor Torres the senator's nephew. Blood family that the senator didn't know existed. The affair with Rebecca Chun was more recent, but no less documented once Diane started looking. She'd found their meeting schedules, committee hearings where both had been present, found emails between their offices that were professional but more frequent than necessary, found credit card records showing the senator paying for a burner phone 3 years ago. A classic move for someone establishing a communication channel they didn't want discovered. Rebecca Chun was exactly what Victor had described: brilliant civil rights attorney, divorced, no children, dedicated to her work. Her online presence showed someone deeply principled, someone who fought for people without power against institutions that abused it, not the profile of a woman who'd pursue a married man for money or status, which meant the affair was probably what Victor claimed: genuine love between two people who couldn't be together publicly without destroying everything they'd built professionally. Diane had seen enough illicit relationships in her career to distinguish between opportunistic affairs and real connection. The photos Victor had shown her, the body language, the way the senator looked at Rebecca, that wasn't performative, that was authentic. But authentic didn't mean right, didn't mean it should be protected. Senator Ashford was a public figure. His family values platform was part of his political brand. If he was living a lie, deceiving his wife and his constituents, didn't the public have a right to know? Diane had built her career on exposure, on bringing hidden things to light. Her job was to find the truth and document it, regardless of who got hurt. Except she kept thinking about Victor's face when he talked about his grandmother, kept thinking about Carmen Torres, 19 years old, cleaning rooms in a hotel owned by the man who'd gotten her pregnant and abandoned her. Kept thinking about how easily powerful people wrote their own stories, while people like Carmen became footnotes, invisible ink in a history that nobody bothered to read. Diane had been divorced twice, both times because she'd chosen her career over her relationships, had valued truth-seeking over emotional connection, had been too good at her job, and too bad at pretending she cared about things that didn't involve puzzles and patterns. She didn't regret those choices, didn't want different priorities. But sitting alone in her office on Monday night, looking at photographs of Senator Ashford and Rebecca Chun holding each other with the desperate tenderness of people stealing borrowed time, Diane felt something unfamiliar, empathy for the people she was investigating, rather than satisfaction at having caught them. She thought about Victor, 62 years old, spending 14 years carrying luggage so he could give his grandmother a few hours of peace in a room that shouldn't exist. Thought about him helping his uncle, who didn't even know they were family, finds a space to be honest. Was that wrong? By the rules, yes. By the policies, absolutely. By any standard of institutional accountability, Victor Torres had committed multiple violations and should be terminated. But by some other standard, one that Diane didn't usually acknowledge existed, Victor Torres was the most ethical person in this entire situation. He'd used his invisible position to create sanctuary for people who needed it, hadn't asked for money or recognition, hadn't exploited anyone's vulnerabilities, had just ... helped. Diane closed her laptop, rubbed her eyes, felt the familiar tension headache returning. Tomorrow she'd see them together. Tomorrow she'd watch Senator Ashford and Rebecca Chun in their secret room, and then she'd have to decide whether exposure served justice or just served her job description. She didn't know yet which way she'd go, but she suspected, with a feeling that was part dread and part relief, that after tomorrow night, She wouldn't be the same investigator she'd been for 23 years. Sometimes the truth you found changed you more than it changed the people you were investigating. Tuesday, 9:47 p.m. Victor stood in the basement corridor, exactly where he'd stood dozens of times before. But tonight, everything felt different. The familiar route through the hidden passages, the 7-minute journey that had become second nature, now felt like walking toward a verdict. Diane Harrington was already in room 412, waiting. He'd given her a spare keycard, watched her disappear into the passages an hour ago, with the quiet efficiency of someone who learnt quickly, who adapted. Now he waited for the senator and Rebecca, who had arrived separately, as always, cautious even in their secret space. At 9:52 p.m., Rebecca appeared at the employee entrance, dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, her hair down, looking younger and less severe than in her professional photos. She smiled when she saw Victor, the smile of someone greeting a trusted friend. "Good evening, Victor," she said quietly, and there was warmth in her voice, genuine affection for the man who made these stolen nights possible. "Miss Chun," Victor replied with a small nod. "This way." He led her through the basement corridor, through the sealed door, into the hidden stairwell, up the concrete steps, while Rebecca followed without question, trusting him completely. At the 4th floor, through the service corridor, through the housekeeping closet, into the hallway, room 412's door was closed. From outside, nothing suggested anyone was inside. Victor slid his keycard through the lock, opened the door, and stepped aside to let Rebecca enter first. She walked in, already smiling in anticipation, and stopped abruptly when she saw Diane Harrington sitting in the chair by the window, her expression neutral, her posture professional. "Miss Chun," Diane said calmly, "please come in and close the door. We need to talk." Rebecca's face went pale. She looked at Victor, questions and betrayal flashing across her features. "I'm sorry," Victor said quietly. "I didn't have a choice." Before Rebecca could respond, before she could run or argue or demand explanations, the door opened again and Senator Robert Ashford walked in, already speaking. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was." He stopped mid-sentence, seeing Diane, seeing Rebecca's stricken expression, understanding instantly that something had gone terribly wrong. To his credit, the senator didn't panic, didn't bluster or threaten or try to assert authority. He simply stood in the doorway, his hands still on the handle, and assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of someone accustomed to political maneuvering. "Who are you?" he asked Diane, his voice level. "Diane Harrington, Director of Loss Prevention for the Biltmore, which is corporate language for the person who catches people breaking the rules." She gestured to the other chair, the one Victor had brought for his grandmother. "Please sit down, Senator. Both of you. This conversation will be easier if we're all civilized about it." Ashford looked at Victor. "Did you do this? Did you set us up?" "No," Victor said, and meant it. "I showed her this room to protect my grandmother. Everything else followed from that." "Your grandmother?" Rebecca asked, confused. Diane interrupted before Victor could respond. "We can discuss family trees later. Right now, we need to address the immediate situation. Senator Miss Kuhn, you've been conducting an affair in a hotel room that doesn't officially exist, facilitated by an employee using unauthorized access to hidden passages that aren't on any security documentation. I have photographs, timestamps, and enough evidence to end your political career and destroy both your reputations." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca sank into the chair, her face in her hands. Ashford remained standing, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating the angles, looking for the escape route that Diane knew didn't exist. "What do you want?" the senator asked finally, cutting to the heart of it. "Money? A position? Immunity from prosecution? Everyone wants something." Diane laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You know, that's exactly what I expected you to say." That's what powerful people always assume, that everyone has a price, that everything's transactional. She stood, walked to the dresser, picked up the photograph of young Carmen Torres, standing in front of the hotel. "This woman was invisible to your father," Diane said, showing the senator the photograph. "Invisible to everyone who stayed in this hotel, who benefited from her labor, who used her and then forgot she existed. And when she needed help, when she was pregnant and alone and desperate, your family paid her to stay invisible." Ashford's face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on the photograph. "Victor Torres is your nephew," Diane continued, her voice quiet but relentless. "His mother was your half-sister, Elena Torres, your father's illegitimate daughter. And for 14 years, Victor has worked in this hotel. Your family's legacy, carrying luggage and being invisible, just like his grandmother." The senator's mask cracked. He looked at Victor with something like horror, something like recognition. "Is that true?" Ashford asked. Victor nodded slowly. "Robert Ashwood III was my grandfather. He abandoned my grandmother when she was pregnant, paid her off, pretended she didn't exist." "Jesus," Ashford breathed. He sat down heavily on the bed, his politician's composure completely shattered. "Jesus Christ. Elena, I remember that name. There was a trust. My father set up a trust for someone named Elena Torres. I found the paperwork after he died. Never understood what it was for." "Guilt money," Victor said flatly. "A way to feel better about abandoning his daughter without actually acknowledging her existence." The room fell silent except for the radio, still playing its soft big band music, oblivious to the decades of secrets unraveling around it. Rebecca looked up, her face stained with tears. "What happens now?" Diane set the photograph down carefully, turned to face all of them. "That's what I've been trying to decide. By every rule I'm supposed to follow, I should report Victor for unauthorized access, escort both of you off the premises, document everything, and submit my findings to hotel management and probably law enforcement." She paused. "But I've been thinking about what Victor said, about invisible people, about the difference between what's documented and what's true. And I've been thinking about why you two need this room." She looked at the senator. "You're trapped, aren't you? Trapped by your image, your platform, your political persona. You can't love who you actually love because it doesn't fit the story your voters expect. So you built a life around a lie, and that lie became so big you can't escape it." Ashford said nothing, but his silence was confirmation. Diane turned to Rebecca. "And you're brilliant and principled, and you fell in love with someone unavailable. You knew it was wrong by conventional standards, but you also knew that what you felt was real, more real than his public marriage, more honest than his political career. So you took what you could get, these 90-minute intervals every few weeks, because something felt better than nothing." Rebecca nodded, a tiny movement. "And Victor," Diane continued, "you facilitated all of this because you understand what it means to be invisible, to have your truth erased by people with more power. So when your uncle, who doesn't even know your family, needed a safe place, you gave it to him, not for money, not for leverage, but because you're a better person than anyone in your family tree deserves." She walked back to the window, looked out at the Miami night. "So here's what I've decided. I'm going to do something I've never done in 23 years of this job. I'm going to forget what I found. I'm going to delete the files, erase the evidence, and let this room continue to not exist in any official capacity." Victor felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized was wound tight until it released. Rebecca gasped, a sound between sob and laugh. The senator stared at Diane like she'd just announced she could fly. "Why?" Ashford asked, his voice raw. "Why would you do that?" Diane turned back to face them, and her expression was softer than Victor had ever seen it. "Because I'm tired of rules that punish honesty more than deception, tired of systems that protect powerful people's public images while destroying everyone else's private truths. And because she looked directly at Victor, someone needs to be visible, someone needs to matter. And maybe that someone is you. She picked up her bag, moved toward the door. I'll continue my investigation into the hotel's other security issues. I'll submit a report. But it won't mention any of you, and it won't mention this room. As far as the official record is concerned, there are no gaps in the footage, no unexplained discrepancies. And Victor Torres is exactly what he appears to be, an experienced bellhop who's never caused any trouble. She paused with her hand on the door handle. Senator, you should tell your wife the truth. Maybe not publicly, but privately. She deserves to know who she's married to. And Rebecca, she looked at the attorney with something like sympathy. You deserve more than stolen moments. You deserve someone who can claim you in daylight. She opened the door, then looked back one more time. Victor, bring your grandmother whenever she needs it. I'll make sure the security schedules leave this hallway unmonitored during your usual visiting hours. She's earned the right to be home. And then Diane Harrington walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving 3 people sitting in the amber lamplight of room 412, stunned and grateful and fundamentally changed by the strange mercy of a woman who'd learnt, finally, that being good at her job sometimes meant knowing when not to do it. 3 weeks later, Victor Torres carried a suitcase through the Biltmore's lobby, nodding politely at guests who didn't see him, moving with the practiced efficiency of 14 years' experience. Everything appeared exactly as it had always been. But 2 things had changed. The first, Senator Robert Ashford had announced in a carefully worded press statement that he would not seek re-election. He cited personal reasons and a need to prioritize family. The political analysts speculated endlessly about scandals that didn't exist, affairs that couldn't be proven, ambitions that had mysteriously evaporated. 3 days after the announcement, Ashford's wife filed for divorce. The proceedings were quiet, expensive, and mercifully brief. 6 months later, Senator Ashford, now private citizen, Ashford was photographed at a restaurant with Rebecca Chun, their fingers intertwined on the table, both of them smiling with the relief of people who'd stopped hiding. The news cycle barely noticed. Former senators dating lawyers wasn't scandalous enough to compete with the daily chaos of politics. They'd lost the protection of power, but they'd gained the freedom of irrelevance. Ashford had reached out to Victor eventually. A careful letter sent to the Biltmore's HR department, asking for contact information, explaining about the trust fund his father had established, asking if they could meet. Victor had thought about it for days. Then he'd replied with his own letter, polite and distant, saying that he was glad Ashford had found happiness, that he bore no ill will, but that family was more complicated than shared DNA, and he preferred to keep his distance. He'd never mentioned their uncle-nephew relationship to his grandmother. She wouldn't remember it anyway, and some invisible truths were better left unspoken. The second change was more visible, at least to those few people who paid attention to the elderly woman who now sat every Tuesday and Friday afternoon in the Biltmore's lobby, in a comfortable chair positioned near the windows where the afternoon light was warmest. Carmen Torres, 89 years old, her hair white and her hands trembling, sat in that chair like she belonged there, like she'd earned it. Sometimes she seemed confused, asking passers-by if they knew when her shift started, if the manager had assigned her rooms yet. Other times she was perfectly present, watching the guests with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd spent decades serving them. The hotel staff had been informed via a memo from Diane Harrington's office that Mrs. Torres was a retired employee, an honored guest, and she was to be treated with courtesy and respect. Her presence was authorized at all times. Nobody questioned it. Nobody investigated the unusual arrangement. Diane Harrington's reports carried weight, and if she said something was authorized, it was authorized. Victor would find his grandmother in that lobby chair during his shifts, would bring her tea and sit with her during his breaks, would listen to her stories that wandered between past and present. She told him about the rooms she'd cleaned, the guests she'd served, the life she'd built from nothing, and sometimes, when she was having a good day, he'd bring her to room 412 through the hidden passages, and she'd sit in a special chair and feel completely home. But increasingly, she didn't need the secret room. The lobby was enough. Being visible was enough. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, Victor finished his shift and found his grandmother dozing in her lobby chair. The sun set, painting her face in shades of gold and amber. He stood watching her for a moment. This woman who'd raised him, who'd worked invisible all her life, who'd loved someone who wouldn't claim her, and raised a daughter who should have had a father and taught her. Grandson, that dignity wasn't something you were given, it was something you maintained, regardless of whether anyone noticed. He gently touched her shoulder, and she woke with a start, then smiled when she saw him. "Mijo," she said, using the Spanish endearment she'd called him since he was small. "Are you working today?" "Just finished, abuela. Ready to go home." She looked around the lobby with clear eyes, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the elegant guests and the marble floors that she'd once cleaned on her hands and knees. "This place," she said softly. "I gave my life to this place. Gave it everything." "I know," Victor said. She looked up at him, her expression suddenly focused, suddenly completely present. "But it didn't take everything," she said firmly. "I kept you. I kept Elena. I kept myself. Nobody took that." Victor felt his throat tighten. "No, abuela. Nobody took that." He helped her to her feet, offered his arm, and together they walked toward the entrance. The doorman who knew Victor, who'd received the memo about Carmen Torres, smiled warmly and wished them a good evening. As they stepped out into the Miami night, the hotel lit up behind them like a palace in a fairy tale. Carmen turned back for one last look. "I was beautiful once," she said, not quite to Victor, more to herself. "I was young and beautiful and he said he loved me." Victor squeezed her hand gently. "You're still beautiful, abuela, and I love you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and smiled. "You see me," she said wonderingly. "You always see me." "Always," Victor promised. And as they walked to the parking lot, as the hotel's lights blazed behind them and the city's night embraced them, Victor Torres, Bellhop, grandson, nephew, guardian of invisible people and secret passages, felt something he'd never quite felt before. He felt seen, not by everyone, not by the world, but by the people who mattered, by the woman he'd loved and protected, by the security director who'd chosen mercy over rules, by the uncle who'd sent grateful letters that Victor might never answer. The hidden passages still existed, running through the Biltmore's walls like veins, like memories, like the truths that buildings hold when everyone thinks they've been renovated away. Room 412 still existed in its bureaucratic limbo, still sheltered those rare moments when people needed to be honest without being watched. And Diane Harrington still worked her job, still found patterns and solved puzzles and caught people breaking the rules, but now she did it with the understanding that some rules existed to be broken, that some secrets deserved protection, and that the most important investigations were the ones that taught you when to stop investigating. 6 months later, when Diane submitted her resignation to take a position as an independent ethics consultant advising companies on how to build systems that protected people instead of just protecting institutions, she cleaned out her office and found one item she'd kept hidden in her desk drawer, a photograph. Carmen Torres, 19 years old, standing in front of the Biltmore Hotel, smiling at whoever held the camera, young and hopeful and beautiful. On the back, in Diane's own handwriting, were 5 words: "Some people deserve to matter." She put the photograph in her personal bag, walked out of the Biltmore for the last time as an employee, and didn't look back. Behind her, in the hidden passages between walls, in the secret room that didn't exist, in the invisible spaces where truth lived alongside official records, the real history of the hotel continued. Written, not in documents or security footage, but in the lives of people who'd learned that sometimes the most important stories are the ones nobody sees, until someone chooses to look, until someone chooses to care, until someone chooses to remember that every invisible person is visible to someone. And that Victor Torres understood as he carried his grandmother's groceries up the stairs to their little Havana apartment, as he listened to her humming old songs from the 1950s, as he prepared for another shift at the hotel that had defined his family's story. That was enough. Being seen by someone was enough. Being remembered by someone was enough. Mattering to someone, even if the world never knew your name, was more than enough. It was everything. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that every person you don't notice still has a story worth seeing, then share it with someone who needs that reminder. Leave a comment about which moment hit you hardest, about the invisible people in your own life who deserve to be seen. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that reveal the truth hiding in plain sight. And like this video to help us reach others who need to know that being invisible doesn't mean you don't matter. Sometimes the most important people are the ones nobody sees until someone decides to look.